What's happening? It's Mark, Ethereal Obelisk, my YouTube channel, where I talk about modern issues that young men face, primarily in their 20s and 30s. Today I want to talk about um, more or less being an enabler, a pleaser, a nice guy. It's a topic that I can relate to a lot. I've struggled with the issue my whole life. Why? I don't, who knows? I mean, you go into the whole nature versus nurture debate. I was raised primarily in a single parent household. I didn't have a strong male presence in the household. My mom was an enabler. My mom was extremely nice, almost too nice. She worked helping people as a special ed teacher for many years and then taught first grade. So I was around that my whole life. And when you're around that, that's how you model the world. You just assume that that's how everybody is, so that's how you have to be. So I guess I kind of subconsciously modeled my behavior after that, after the things my mom did, more or less. I mean, my dad was around a little bit for a while, but he didn't really model any good behavior, masculine behavior, really, that I can remember. But I mean, I think subconsciously it was programmed in me to treat women nicely, to be respectful, of course, which is always a good thing, but to try and help everybody, which isn't always a bad thing. So, it can be. Some people can't be helped, but also to kind of be an enabler and to be too kind, to do too much. I mean, that was more or less what I saw growing up. And my mom did it to me. She enabled me and my brother by giving too much and being too kind and not setting boundaries with us. So it's what I learned. It's what I saw. I think nowadays with like a lot of single parent households, a lot of guys being raised by women only, I think it's a pretty common thing, this whole nice guy phenomenon. And I don't think any guy, we're just trying, guys that are nice guys, they're just trying to do the right thing. I think a lot of times it's just the way you were raised. You're trying to be the way you were taught, respectful and kind and all that. But, in my life later on, until I kind of became aware of it, it got me in some trouble. I mean, with relationships and with friendships and all sorts of other stuff. Like, two of my, out of the three most serious relationships, the one, the girl had extreme mental health problems. And I pretty much knew that going in. She told me her mom had committed suicide and she struggled with mental health issues. And I didn't know the extent of them, but I still knew that going in. And that should have been a red flag. Like, all right, this girl's cute, and you have a connection, you have common interests, you guys get along, but, you should probably pump the brakes on this and just not jump into anything. But, of course, I let my emotions get the best of me. I got involved heavily with her. I found out later, through the course of the relationship, that she had pretty extreme mental health problems, bipolar, maybe borderline personality, but she had some pretty extreme mental health issues that I found out about. And I basically became her, after a while, after about 6 months, she would call me every day at work, crying, not even knowing why she's crying, and I would, being a psychology major and all that, in my upbringing, I more or less became her counselor every day, and it just kind of killed the intimacy and passion of our relationship. And I mean, that's on me. I should have known better. The first thing you learn in psychology is not to treat your own family or anybody you're intimate with, that it's not healthy. And it wasn't healthy. I mean, the relationship started okay, but then once it turned into this therapy-based thing where I was talking to her and she was crying and I became her therapist, and she started telling me all these deep-seated issues from her childhood, it just kind of ruined the sexual polarity of the relationship. And just eventually, I was with her for 2 years, and a year and a half of it was basically me being her therapist. I don't blame her. I think, her mom was mentally ill. I think a lot of it was genetic, and I think she also went through some traumatic stuff from her mom and dad. So I don't blame her. I blame myself for not saying, look, you probably shouldn't be in a relationship right now. I really care about you, but you should probably get professional help. And she did go to a counselor, but she needed more extreme help than one counselor she saw that was more or less her friend, and then the rest was on me. I mean, she was kind of lacked the self-awareness and the objectivity to kind of see that she was extremely ill mentally. I mean, there was times where she would cry so much her eyes hurt. It would be like for 2 days, and it'd be like a whole day of crying, and she didn't know why. I mean, and when that's going on, there's a serious problem going on. And instead of owning up to it, she kind of would blame it on all these things that happened with her parents. And I don't want to go into details, but the bottom line is I should have seen that. I should have seen the red flags. I should have put my foot down. But instead, I thought I can fix her. I can help her. I care about her, so in turn, I should fix her and help her. I love her, so I should do everything I can to make her better, regardless of all these other issues that I'm trying to ignore. Not to mention, I was dealing with my own issues at the time. So we both had our issues going on, but I enabled it for 2 years, and I was being the nice guy, being the pleaser, being the fixer, the guy that was trying to think his way through everything and sacrifice himself to help the girl he loved, to bend over backwards and do everything and not set boundaries and not say, hey, look, I should be your lover, not your therapist. I just didn't know enough. I was younger, but maybe one of you guys can learn from it, because I was too young to know that that's not a healthy route to go. It screws up the relationship, and eventually the relationship is just bound to fail. That one was bound to fail. And I think I knew it subconsciously, but I just held on because of codependency, fear of losing her, all this other stuff, attachments, unhealthy attachments. So yeah, that one eventually ended, erupted in kind of a bad end. And then this most recent one was totally different. It wasn't more so much mental health, but it was an other end of the spectrum, where it was, she had just come back from another state. She was having a hard time financially, and had, and I should have known right away. She had this whole story about how she got robbed in this other state and how she lost all her belongings. She had to move back home and live with her mom, and she was working as a bartender. She was, she'd gotten her an apartment by the time I met her, but it wasn't furnished, it was empty. But, she went on, and, looking back now, I don't have any idea if she told me was true or not. Honestly, knowing how I know her now, I don't know if the story she told me about where she was at, I don't know if any of that stuff's true, because when you get some perspective, and I should have known, and you learn from this stuff, I should have known, but when somebody starts telling you stories and they're always the victim, like, there's no accountability, there's no taking responsibility, they never do anything wrong, and it's always everybody else. The ex-boyfriend's fault, it's the dad's fault that wasn't around, he's crazy, the boyfriend was crazy, everybody else in her life is crazy but her. And she's always the victim. And, when you're not in the right state of mind, you don't see this stuff as a problem. You just see it as, oh, this person's being honest with me and just telling me their life and their story. That's how I perceived it at the time. It didn't, and I kind of beat myself over it now, even though I've just come to accept what happened. But it bothers me that I lack the three-dimensional thinking to see past all that stuff. But when you hardly know somebody, you want to see the best in them, I feel. Like, from the beginning, you want to see the good in them. You don't want to assume, oh, this person might not be telling me the truth. And I tried to tell her straight up at the beginning, like, be honest with me, be transparent with me, and everything will be good between us. And even if it doesn't work out, we'll be on good terms. And, so looking back, who knows what she said was real. I mean, I think a lot of it was based in reality, but I also think a lot of it was her being a victim and not taking any accountability for her own poor decision making. So, she told me about all these issues that happened in another state. She moved back home. She was living with her mom. She had an apartment, but it wasn't furnished. She didn't have the electricity on yet. It was a nice apartment. She was staying with her mom, so she started hanging out with me a bunch. Looking back now with perspective, it's like, I don't know what I was thinking. I was at a really weird place in my life, too, at the point, so I guess we kind of helped each other out, because I had only been a couple months sober, and, I was in a bad spot. So I was just recovering still physically and mentally, so she kind of helped me too. I mean, I wasn't in the greatest place, but yeah, so she didn't have a lot. She didn't have a car at that point. We started spending a lot of time together. I started, I would get her Ubers to work. She would stay over, basically staying at my place. I would get her Ubers over to her job. I would drive her. I even got to the point where I was letting her consistently use my car when I didn't need it for work. She would drive my car. I would pay, and I never asked for money back for these Ubers. I would pay for Ubers. I would pay, I would let her use my car. And looking back, it wasn't my responsibility, even though I cared about her at that point. It wasn't my responsibility to do these things for her. And in her mind, I feel like she kind of felt entitled to him, and that's her way of thinking. I'm entitled to this stuff because we're dating. But to me, it's like, you're not entitled to jack shit. Like, we're not married. I don't owe you anything. But, like I said, this is another example of me being a nice guy in enabling behavior, trying to fix people, trying to save somebody from their own issues, because, being vulnerable and just having a connection with somebody, it's just, looking back, it's like I beat myself up over it, but I've also come to learn acceptance. I've learned a lot from it, what to do and what not to do. So, but yeah, she didn't have much. To get back to the story, so I did all these things for her. Eventually, during the quarantine, she stayed with me. I spent all the money on groceries. She literally didn't pay for anything. Was able to save money the whole time. And then she eventually saved up enough for a car. I loaned her money for that, like, $1,200. She paid me back, but I still loaned it to her. I paid for her first 6 months of a car insurance. And then whenever we get into arguments, she wouldn't bring up any of the things that I did. She'd bring up a few of the things that I would check her on, like spending too much at a grocery store. That's all she focused on. There was no, you bought me, smoothies 3 times a week, or you bought me, groceries for the entire quarantine, or you paid for my car insurance, or all these things I did for her. It would always be focused on the one thing that I didn't do. So, I mean, that's what you get when you enable that kind of behavior. It's not really building love or anything. It's just building somebody else's entitled attitude. That's the problem. And when you start building that entitled attitude, then they start to expect things on a consistent basis. And when you don't provide those things, then all of a sudden they pull back. And it's like, well, he's not providing those things. And they start to pull back. And, not that I was, providing that much. I wasn't buying lots of gifts or anything. But still, it's just, the bottom line is, that wasn't my responsibility. Anything that I did for her was out of the kindness of my heart because I wanted to help her. But eventually, when you do too much, then everything's kind of taken for granted, or things don't carry as much value. The things you do don't carry as much value when you enable that behavior, and when you're a nice guy and you want to fix somebody and help them. Like, you start enabling and you kind of build up a tolerance and start expecting more and more. And then when you don't provide more, then they tend to get upset. And the only person that I can be mad at is me. Like, I enabled all that. I just got too caught up in my feelings. I had too many other things going on. And I wanted, like that helping, fixing thing that's embedded in me from childhood is still there a little bit. I've gotten better at it, but it's still there, and I wanted to help her and, help. And, eventually got to the point where she got her car, was driving, and then the relationship, she furnished her apartment, and then she got a better job, and then all of a sudden, and I don't know if this is coincidental, but all of a sudden the relationship distance started to grow in the relationship. I started seeing her a bunch less. And I mean, she was working a lot more, but I started seeing her a lot less. And then, eventually she did something I thought was super disrespectful. She showed up 3 hours late with a friend when it was supposed to be our night to hang out. So I told her to leave and pack her stuff and go. And then she left, and I didn't talk to her for 2 weeks. But that's just another example of setting boundaries. Like, at that point, I did set boundaries, and I was like, no, you got to leave. You told me it was our night. You told me you were going to be here at 7. You didn't show up, so you got to go. She tried to turn it around on me like I was being the irrational one, but I didn't allow that to cloud my thinking. I still stuck to my guns. And I'm proud of the fact that I kind of stood my ground and said, look, I don't feel appreciated. I did a lot for you. You don't see that now, but with perspective, eventually you will see it. And I just kind of walked away. And I think it feels good. It feels good to accept the present situation. Um, it kind of builds confidence too when you're able to set boundaries if you feel disrespected. Also, communicate that you don't feel appreciated, um, and have the self-awareness to know when you're screwing up and be able to call the other person out. And that if they're not meeting your needs or if they're still feeling entitled, then you got to cut them off and walk away. And that's exactly what I did. And it feels good. But just hopefully other people out there can learn from my mistakes, because it's still something I work on a lot. I've gotten way better at it. I've gotten way better at not trying to take care of everybody, especially in relationships. Even in friendships too, I've gotten in trouble with that. Trying to help people too much when they don't want to help themselves. You got to be a part of your own rescue. You got to, like somebody drowning, you can't just flop you got to actually grab onto the other person. So it's same with a relationship or a friendship. You can't save somebody if they're not willing to help themselves. Like in the case with the first girl and the second girl, if they're not willing to if they don't have the self-awareness to admit when they're wrong, or if they don't have the have it in them to appreciate what you do because they feel entitled to things, then you need to walk away and find somebody who does, because that person is out there. You just can't have that fear in your mind that, and it's a crippling. It can't be a crippling fear, but fear that you're not going to meet anybody else that you have a connection with like this person, because it's absolutely not true. I mean, there's a million people out there, and eventually, if you're meant to, you'll find that right person for you. But yeah, I mean, those are two examples with those two relationships. I could go on and on about friendships, friends that I had that I just couldn't help, but I'll save that for another video. Just wanted to talk about that a little bit and see if anybody else out there had been through similar situations. I mean, or if they're willing to admit it, because I think a lot of guys in this current culture get caught up in being too nice, because a lot of men are raised by women and taught to be polite, and then they end up getting burned for it, like I did. And you can only blame yourself, but you can blame yourself, but you can also learn from it, educate yourself, and read. Like I read this book. The best book I've ever read on it is No More Mr. Nice Guy. I can't remember the author's name, but it's on Amazon. It's called No More Mr. Nice Guy, and it's an excellent book on not being a nice guy, like interested in being more of a good guy that sets boundaries, has self-confidence, is willing to walk away, and a guy that gets what he wants out of life. It's a great book on it. It taught me a lot. Kind of got me through it. I could have been stuck in this last relationship for another 3 years being miserable, but instead I set boundaries. When she wasn't willing to, when she was still crossing those, I walked and didn't look back and just, I don't need this. I'm happier alone. I'm content being alone. I can be by myself and be fine. So yeah, hopefully somebody out there finds this useful, and there's some people that can discuss it in the comment section and talk about their experiences. And with that, I'll see you in the next video. All right, bye.